When people say attention, often it is that there are too many thoughts crowding, and therefore you are not able to focus on one thought, and that is where it will help. Now, let's say if you have two, three, or four tasks that you are trying to do at the same time, it's difficult for anybody. But when you train your brain to handle one thing at a time, things get better.
Welcome to the Neurocrish Immersion. In this episode, we are going to discuss brain, mind, and yoga. And we have with us a very eminent professor of psychiatry who works in the space of integrative medicine at NIMHANS, Mr. Shivarama Varambally. Welcome, Shivarama, to this podcast.
Thank you, Dr. Krishnamurthy. I'm very happy to be here, especially discussing the work that we have done at. It's a passion for us at NIMHANS to be working on the brain and the yoga. So thank you very much.
Absolutely, and I know that this has been going on for a very long time, and
Yes.
Gadar was one of the people who first got interested, and he has roped in excellent people like you to carry on that work. Why don't you start by telling us a bit about yourself, your training, your career?
So I'm basically a psychiatrist with training in NIMHANS itself, MD Psychiatry. And then I did work in Australia for a brief bit, around 3 years as a psychiatrist. And then I came back in 2007. And it so happened that in 2007, I don't know whether it was I came at the right time or I had anything to do with it, that Dr. Gangadhar, you were just mentioning, who was my mentor at NIMHANS, started the NIMHANS Yoga Center. Not that yoga had not been there in NIMHANS before, but it was primarily a purely research topic. It was not clinically applied till that time. So in 2007, we started first teaching it to patients who come to NIMHANS, and that piqued my interest. And then after that, we have been doing a lot of work on yoga. So when I go and speak outside, many people think that I'm a yogi. I'm not. I'm a psychiatrist who has research interest in yoga. So that's the thing. And of course, based on the work we have done, that it was initially in a project mode at NIMHANS. It was just a project, 5-year project. But based on the interesting work that came out of that project, NIMHANS then took it on itself to start the NIMHANS Integrated Center for Yoga in 2014. And that has now translated into a full-fledged department of integrative medicine with Ayurveda, yoga, and modern psychiatry together in one department from 2019.
Wonderful, and that must be quite path-breaking, one of a kind.
Oh yes.
Certainly in India.
Among what we are called the institutions of national importance in India, like the AIIMS, and it's the first full-fledged department of integrative medicine. And I'm happy to say that it has actually sparked off very similar kind of setups in most of the AIIMS now. Now that we have almost 18 All India Institute of Medical Sciences across India, in fact, in 2023 October, we conducted a workshop for all the directors of these institutions on how to set up some similar centers.
Wonderful. At a personal level, you have chosen to complete a doctorate in yoga.
Yes.
Yoga research. Can you tell us your personal journey? What brought you into yoga and what made you research it so actively?
My primary interest actually has always been severe mental illness, schizophrenia and all that. I did my thesis on that under Dr. Gangadhar when I was doing my MD. But when I came back from Australia, I saw a chance to combine this with yoga, because if you look at the use of yoga in mental health, it's nothing new. People have been doing yoga for a long time, but primarily it was limited to people who had minor anxiety, maybe minor depression, things like that. And it had never really been tried very seriously for people with serious mental illness. There is a university in Bangalore called SVyasa, the SVyasa Yoga University. They had actually done a small study in the year 2000 on people with schizophrenia trying to do yoga. That really allowed me to combine both my interests into one, and we have been actually doing yoga for people with severe mental illness for the last almost 18 years. And it's been very interesting to see that not only that these people derive benefit, but we can actually show it in a modern neurobiological research kind of paradigm, that we can show the changes. That's what led me into this field.
Wonderful. And just this leads me on to my next question. In popular concept, we think of yoga as a series of physical stretches and movements and breathing.
Yeah.
How does it? How do specific yoga practices impact the brain and mind? What's the science?
So it's very interesting to see the evolution of yoga. I mean, it is, I mean, I'm not politically being correct, but I would say that it's an American version of yoga. That what you see in Cult Fit or any of these gyms now, it's another version of cardio. So maybe in the Western, it is to promote it, it has been sold like that. But if you really look at yoga in terms of the text, for example, the really most people in yoga swear by the Patanjali Yoga Sutra. If you look at that, for example, there is almost in all the 196 aphorisms which are there in the Patanjali Yoga Sutra, there is not a single named asana or pranayama. It's all about the mind actually. So he says very clearly that getting the body trained is just a step on the way to handling the mind, simply because you cannot really have a still mind if you have a very troubled body. So he makes it very, very clear that the ultimate target is the brain and the mind, not the body. So that's what we think. And very interestingly, we see that yoga practices actually, if done in a very, what you would call meditative way, have a lot of brain effects. On the other hand, if you do yoga very fast, like a cardio, of course it has physical benefits, but then you are probably not going to get the mental benefits what are talked about in the ancient texts. So it depends on how you do the yoga. So many people ask this question to me, okay, how is yoga different from exercise? We have published actually a paper on that in the International Review of Psychiatry. What are the commonalities and the differences between yoga and exercise? Because this is many people are interested in this question. And I would say that the main two differences are, one is breathing, of course, and the second is the mindfulness aspect. If you do yogic practice without looking at your breathing and mindfulness, it's just exercise. On the other hand, if you do exercise very mindfully and with the attention to the breathing, it becomes yoga. So yeah, that's the.
You've been involved in a lot of research that also involves modern neuroimaging and things like that. So how does a simple breathing practice, for example, influence the brain? What actually happens when we engage in these practices, perhaps not once, but repetitively?
To answer that, I think I'll give you a very simple example. Dr. Gangadhar's daughter, when she was an MBBS student, Kalyani, now she's a psychiatrist, of course, she did a very simple study looking at Om chanting. What happens to the brain when people are doing Om chanting? Particularly when you chant that kind of sound, which is also very similar to a yogic practice called as Brahmari, the bee humming kind of sound. Very interestingly, what we found is that when you actually do that practice, the blood flow to the parts of the brain which control emotion actually comes down. So the limbic system, what we call, which controls most of our emotions, particularly the negative emotions that arise from that part of the brain, Om chanting seemed to bring down the activity in that region, as compared to something neutral sound which did not have this humming kind of a quality. And that is what, it's a very simple example, just people sitting and doing or Om or whatever it is. And it very interestingly, it can be, it has been applied actually as a very secular way of looking at it. It has been applied into Amen, Amin. I mean, the primary thing is the humming sound. And if such a small practice can produce blood flow changes in the brain, imagine what 10 or 20 years of practice can do. Now that's the real magic of, yoga.
I should probably take the opportunity to remind our listeners about the podcast we did on the monk brain, where we discussed how overactive amygdala,
yes,
part of the limbic system, is responsible for anxiety and emotional dysregulation.
Absolutely,
It's very
absolutely.
interesting to hear from you how a simple thing like chanting Om has an impact on silencing that
Yes,
part of our brain.
yes,
One of the things that a lot of young people, students, professionals struggle with is attention, focus, mental clarity. Especially I think COVID brought this out to a very large audience of people, and I think the effects still remain
yes.
in the population. How does yoga help in this regard? How can it help students improve their attention, their memory, their focus, their mental clarity? What's the science?
Yeah, I think what you said is very much true. We are seeing a explosion in people self-diagnosing ADHD and attention and things like that, and saying, no, I read on Google that ChatGPT says I have, ADHD. Do I need to take stimulants and stuff like that?
Yes.
But we have actually done a study on children with ADHD, looking at some yoga practices which can help them. Of course, it has to be very tailored for the particular disorder. That's a very important thing. It's not that all yoga is good for everything. That's very, very clear now. So people who say, "Oh, okay, yoga will help everything," you can't say that scientifically. So we tailored very brief 10-15 minute kind of yoga practices, particularly pranayama is what really seems to help attention.
Right.
A combination of initial fast breathing followed by slow breathing handles both anxiety and attention very well, and it can be tailored to what you really want out of yoga. So I often say that, look, if you want a flat stomach, there are so many options you can do. I mean, you can do yoga as well, but then that's probably not the best option for just if you want a physical change. But if you do want a mental change, so for example, the famous economist, Nobel Prize winner Daniel Kahneman talks about thinking fast and slow, the two system 1 and system 2. And most of us have got now used to only what he calls the system 1, which is the immediate response, impulsive response, right? We see something, we immediately react, maybe anger, maybe something else. And he says the trick is to shift to system 2. And that is where actually practices like yoga actually help. And the attention, when people say attention, often it is that there are too many thoughts crowding, and therefore you're not able to focus on one thought. And that is where it will help. Now, let's say if you have 3 or 4 tasks that you are trying to do at the same time, it's difficult for anybody. But when you train your brain to handle one thing at a time, things get better. And pranayama is, in fact, they call in the yoga, they call it as the rope to consciousness. They say the pranayama, the breathing, is the rope you hold when you go down into this well of consciousness. That's what they say in yoga.
Wonderful. Gives me an opportunity to just, I think it's of historical interest, and perhaps a lot of people who are listening to us will not know the history of yoga. Can you tell us a little bit about Patanjali and how yoga evolved?
So what we believe now is that it was not that there was no yoga before Patanjali, but Patanjali was a genius in that sense, who codified whatever available yoga practices into an understandable kind of a framework which could be followed. For example, yoga is there even in the Bhagavad Gita, yoga is there in all the ancient texts. Is probably the earliest mention of yoga comes from, is around 7,000 years back. In that it was, and if you look at the evolution of the understanding of yoga, initially it was all about how to become more spiritual and connect to a higher consciousness. That was in fact, the earliest texts go on to say that yoga is a method of joining individual consciousness to the universal consciousness. That was the first definition of yoga. But Patanjali brought it down to more practical kind of consideration, where he said it is chitta vritti nirodha. It is the ability to control the modulations of our mind which otherwise, it jumps like a monkey, is what is often said. So how to bring it into regulation is yoga. That's what he said. And then he went on to detail how you should do it.
Right.
So Dr. Gangadhar often says that the Bhagavad Gita is the textbook and the Patanjali Yoga Sutra is the manual.
Right.
Like we have in medicine, we have a textbook, the Harrison, but when we want to examine a person, then we read, other manuals, which
Yes.
we want to do, how to do it.
Hutchison's clinical methods.
Yeah, Hutchison's, yes.
Yes. Okay. Which brings me to the question on emotional regulation. Emotional dysregulation is something that a lot of people struggle with. It can be just during periods of high stress, even for people who are otherwise well. It can be a symptom of anxiety or depression. It can be part of something more serious like a bipolar disorder or schizophrenia or an addiction disorder. It's
Yes.
kind of a common symptom that a lot of people struggle with. I'm not able to manage my emotions. I have outbursts. I'm impulsive. I get aggressive. Or I engage in self-destructive behavior or outwardly destructive behavior. Are there specific yogic practices that people with emotional dysregulation as an important symptom can actually follow?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, this is the core of most of the what you call the third wave psychotherapies, all are which are based on mindfulness. So that derives from two major sources. One is the Indian yogic tradition, and of course the Buddhist meditation techniques, which talk about the middle path and the Zen and things like that. So putting it together, what essentially is that this ability to focus on something like breathing in a mindful way is a big thing which is going to improve emotional regulation. The second perspective from the yoga angle is what is given by the Bhagavad Gita, in which the Krishna explains to Arjuna that the senses are like horses, which you have, somebody is holding the reins of the horses, but even the person who's holding the reins of the horses is not the person who thinks. There is another person in the back who is observing all this, and that your thoughts are not you. You are different. You are having thoughts, you are having emotions, but that doesn't define you. So many people can have many thoughts. Bangalore traffic sometimes makes everybody goes crazy, but it's not something that, it's a thought that doesn't define me. I am not my thought. I am not my emotion, right? I have all these things, but there is another me which is watching this from the sort of a detached perspective, and that me has the choice to respond in any particular way. So that choice, as long as we keep it with ourselves, why should we be afraid of thoughts and emotions? That's perfectly all right. We should not let it define our actions, is what the Bhagavad Gita says. That because the modern world, evokes a lot of emotion in us. Everything is driven by either some positive emotion, negative emotion, and the ability to be a little away from this and see this as aspects like a wave in the sea is what is described in the Bhagavad Gita, that there are many waves in the sea, but you are not the wave. You are just observing the wave. That is the perspective from yoga. And some of the practices, for example, the simple slower breathing practices where you observe your breathing. The simple one, there is I think a podcast by a person called Naveen, not a podcast, I think TEDx, by a person called Naveen Varshne, which is very interesting. He talks about the connection between thinking and breathing. And he says if you breathe slowly, you cannot think fast. It is simply not possible. There is a direct connection between breathing and thinking. So slowing down your breathing is one of the best things you can do to slow down your thinking, give you more control over your emotions and your thoughts. And it can be done in 2 minutes, The what we used to be taught in psychiatry, the Jacobson's progressive muscular relaxation, something similar you can do in 2 minutes.
You meet people who are very driven.
Yes.
For them, thinking fast making snap decisions,
Yes.
they see those as virtues.
Yes.
Okay. How does yoga help someone like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's as a part of their business, or what they do, if that is required. Say you are a race car driver, I mean, you need to make split second decisions. You don't have an option there if you're F1 driver. But even then, being aware that I am making this decision is the issue. And as long as they're aware of that, that's perfectly all right. If you need to make fast decisions, yeah, for sportsmen, for example. But you look at every sports team in the world now, they have a yoga therapist. Why is that? Obviously, they get benefit from that, and what they're able to see, like I often give an example of people like Tendulkar, or who get into this flow state. That's one of the common things that we see in sports, music. People get into a state where they are one with what they are doing. They say that Tendulkar, for example, couldn't see the fielders, he could only see the gaps in the field. That kind of status, when you get into, you can make very fast decisions, but you are making it in that zone where you are not influenced by other things. That's the zone that you should be aiming at.
Thank you. One of the most common things that we encounter when we are talking to people is, of course, symptoms of anxiety, depression, stress. I'm not coping very well with my life.
Yes.
I have real problems. They could be at work, they could be with family, they could be financial, and so on. For such people who are struggling to go through their everyday, what are the simple yogic practices that they could take up and try and incorporate into their daily life?
The simplest thing I would recommend for people is to of course, one important thing I would say is that just don't follow some YouTube or something, because yoga is something that ideally you should learn from somebody. It's something that you learn because the person who is teaching you should know what you want out of yoga, and what is the thing that would benefit you, what may not benefit you. So I would recommend people to get it taught by a yoga therapist or somebody trained, and then of course you make your own set of practices, maybe 10 minutes a day, 15 minutes a day, depending on the time that you have, which you can actually do. Because what we have found in our researches is that if you do yoga less than 3 days a week, it doesn't seem to really produce much changes. Right? It is the regularity which counts more than the duration every day that you do it for. Right? Even if you have 15 minutes every day, that's good enough, but you need to do it at least 3-4 days a week. And what we have found is that if you do a single yoga session, it effects may last up to 4 to 6 days, but the continuation doesn't happen because there is a very big contrast between Western studies of yoga and Indian studies, and one of the reasons is that Western studies almost always it is weekend yoga.
Right.
So the yoga is it is a very long session for 2 hours or whatever, but only on Saturday and Sunday, and it is really in the middle of your work week that you need this balance. And therefore I would suggest such people that you say, for example, a very basic stretching initially. That's very important. A warm-up is very important. So stretching exercises, right? Next is a set of very simple, maybe Surya Namaskar or any asana, maybe just for 2 or 3 minutes. And then the pranayama. Basically, say, for example, you can do the balancing pranayama, the focus on the breathing slow part of it, right? So this all together should not take you more than 15 minutes. So a brief warm-up exercises, Sukshma Vyayama, what it is called in yoga, and then you do a couple of asanas, maybe very common Surya Namaskara is done, and then you go into pranayama, and there is a sequence. So you do loosening first, asana next, fast breathing next, then finally slow breathing, and last 1 or 2 minutes you could simply do shavasana or relaxing kind of. That should give you a lot of benefit, even for people who don't have much time. In fact, we have a program called 5-minute yoga break. which we have implemented in offices, police stations, banks. So where we go, let's say at 11:30 in the morning and say, okay, all of you are taking a 5-minute break and we are doing yoga on the chair and 5-minute yoga. That's all. And that also has, made a lot of changes.
Is this available online for people to look
Yes,
at?
yes. So most of our yoga modules are actually available on YouTube. If you look at the NIMHANS Integrated Center for Yoga YouTube, there are so many things available on the YouTube. And we also, for people who are interested, we run every Monday to Friday, we run a free for anybody yoga session from 6:50 in the morning to 7:30.
This is online.
Online. It's free. It's a Zoom thing. There is the password is just 5 zeros. Because we
Right.
have to put a password, we have put a password. So,
Okay.
but it's just 5 zeros. It's all available on the NIMHANS Integrated Center for Yoga YouTube channel.
Wonderful. And this is every morning, Monday to
Yes,
Friday.
every morning, Monday to Friday.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Great to know that. You kind of partly answered my question, but people who are busy often tend to have packed schedules, travel, they are in a car or an airplane a lot of the time. How can they break this down into micro practices? Is the 5-minute yoga kind of a micro practice? Are there other micro practices that you would recommend?
Oh, yes. Cars and planes are actually great places because you can't do anything else unless it is looking at your mobile and getting more tense.
Correct.
So it's a very good place because you have a place to sit comfortably. That's all you need, right? So if you have a reasonably good chair, you can sit. You can do many of the practices that are needed to actually have a mental balance. You need not do asana all the time. If you are, so let's say for example, you start with something like a slightly faster breathing, a Kapalbhati or something like that, and then you go to the Anulom Vilom, which is the balancing breath, and finally you can do the Brahmari. Together, this should not take you more than 4 or 5 minutes, and that you can do anywhere, in the plane, in the car, and this should actually settle you down. Especially, I tend to do it. Let's say I have a big meeting coming up. Just 10 minutes before the meeting, it sets you up wonderfully for whatever you have to do.
Wonderful. You alluded to this a little while ago, that it's important we engage with authentic people,
Yes.
authentic instructors, authentic teachers.
Yes.
Is there a way in which we can identify who is authentic? Because obviously, it's so hard sometimes in the sort of online marketplace to decide.
Yes. Yeah, this is a very important thing because that's what I was saying, that I would always suggest that you find a person who has time for you to see what is it that you want out of yoga, right? Because let's say there are many YouTube things going on where 1,000 people participating, it's very difficult to see whether that would benefit you because nobody can actually think of 1,000 people at once and what is the yoga for each person. One of the things I would recommend is that you look at, of course, there are now degrees of yoga. Let's say people have an MSc in yoga, people have a PhD in yoga. The Indian government has come up with a set of guidelines which are going to be implemented very shortly about what are the kind of levels of yoga training that people have. There are various stages ending with something called Yogacharya, which is the ultimate thing. That is one. The second, I would recommend that the way they talk about yoga, if they are trying to say that yoga can help anything and everything, and it has no side effects at all, I am very doubtful whether it's a very scientific thing. Anything that has effects also has side effects. There is no doubt about that. And if somebody is saying that, for example, many people say this about Ayurveda and other stuff, that, oh, no, Ayurveda doesn't have any side effects. Of course it does, So you have to be looking at how the person is talking about yoga, and if they are saying something that sounds not scientific, I don't think they have a very good scientific background to talk about yoga in that way, right? There are many good yoga practitioners, But teaching yoga is a completely different thing. For example, I do yoga myself, but I don't think I'm competent to teach yoga. That requires a different set of expertise about understanding the other person. What is it that he can do or she can do? Maybe I can do many things, but is it suitable for them? So I think time and the ability to talk about yoga in a scientific way are the two things which will give you a better learning.
Right. I'm going to ask you two questions which are kind of related to this. The first I want to ask you is, what can go wrong if it is taught to you wrongly or you practice it wrongly? What can actually go wrong with something like yoga?
Oh, lots of things. Lots of things can go wrong. Many people come in context. I'll talk about mental health first. I get a lot of people referred from yoga camps, yoga institutions, where people suddenly come and then start doing meditation 6 hours a day and 10 hours a day, and many of them have a mental breakdown. Some people get into psychosis and things like that. There are a lot of literature worldwide talking about meditation and psychosis, and how sometimes meditation can actually provoke psychosis. So there is a sort of way that you have to get prepared for various yoga practices, and that is why if you look at Patanjali's Ashtanga yoga, what he talks about, the first two he talks about, which not many people talk about, is the yama and the niyama, which are the ways to live, what should do and what to not do, the do's and don'ts. Basically, he puts it as the first two limbs of yoga, much before asana. So he says you have to start living in a yogic way. That's the first two steps. Then comes asana, then comes pranayama. So once you have mastered your body, you are able to sit still, calm your body down, then you go for breathing. And once you have mastered breathing, then you look at your senses. The fifth limb, which is connecting what is called as the Bahiranga yoga or the external yoga, and the Antaranga yoga, which is the internal yoga, that limb is called Pratyahara, which is slowly going away from the senses and going inwards. So that is the fifth limb. And then comes Dharana, Dhyana and Samadhi. So these are the steps of meditation, right? So each of these, if done wrongly, can have a lot of problems. Let's say, for example, somebody is, like you said, very disturbed, very suddenly tries to do meditation. It could worsen that agitation. You look at physical aspect, somebody trying to do an inverted posture can very well, can break their neck. It has happened. People have had shoulder injuries, people have had neck injuries, people have had spinal injuries. Many things have happened. If the person is not ready or tries to do something that is not suitable for him or her, you could have a lot of problems.
Thank you. The related question, and you partly answered this. So like you, I have also experienced people who go into deep meditation practices, Vipassana camps and so on, and then they have a breakdown. And of course, therefore, meditation is not always the right thing for everybody.
Yes.
The related question, because you talked about being a witness. Now, it's as if I'm watching myself.
Yes.
Can be part of a depersonalization, derealization experience,
Yes.
which we don't always consider normal.
Yes.
It can be part of very deep meditative, sadhana.
Yes.
In someone who's a practiced, who's done a lot of mindfulness practice.
Yes.
It can be that. It can be a delusion that
Absolutely.
I believe that I am able to watch myself. From that perspective, how does one distinguish that one's down a healthy path as opposed to one's down a pathway which may not be exactly right?
So this is a very interesting question which has been asked many times. In fact, my colleague Hemant Bhargav and Dr. Gangadhar have actually published a paper on this. How to identify a spiritually advanced person versus somebody who may be psychotic or having, delusions. In many cases, they may look from the outside very similar, right? Because what might happen, for example, is that so let's say a person is not eating well, sleeping well, person doesn't take care of his personal hygiene, person may be psychotic, or the person may have got into a very highly advanced spiritual state where he feels these are not anymore necessary. No. So what will really make the difference is the actions which the person takes based on whatever the person has experienced. And if it is an action that is likely to help the society, the person himself, most of the time these are spiritually advanced people. On the other hand, if the actions reflect disorganization, causing trouble to other people, most likely they're not going in the right path. So it's ultimately the action which would decide what you think the person is actually experiencing, right? For example, Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, many people talk that he was delusional or he had complex partial seizures but what did he use that experience for? He used that experience to help people become more spiritual, do good things in life. That's the mark of a spiritually advanced person, right? Somebody else having an experience like that may become violent, hit people, or do some violence to persons. I mean, then you have to, of course, look at it as a pathological phenomenon.
Thank you. So people who have the experience should learn to self-distinguish, and even more importantly, families and caregivers should
Yes.
absorb this information and learn to distinguish what's healthy and what's not really healthy.
Yes.
Thank you. Now, contrast to that, you've talked about the foundation in Bangalore that's done a lot of work with yoga for people with schizophrenia.
Yes.
And your own research has been in that field. What is healthy and safe for a person with schizophrenia to be performing or practicing from a yogic perspective?
This is a very important question because we have spent the last maybe 15 years focusing on this question, that what are the kind of yoga practices that are good for people with different kind of psychiatric and neurological disorders. So we have in fact published a book on Amazon about the art and science of yoga for mental health. It's brought out through the Indian Psychiatric Society. It was published in 2020. I think it's still available. What we have put together in that is a set of different yoga modules for different disorders. For example, like I said, the structure is very similar, that you start with some loosening and then you do asana and then you pranayama and then you relaxation. But the practices for each disorder are quite a lot of different. For example, in patients with psychosis or schizophrenia, very minimal meditative practices are there, particularly meditating with eyes closed, we do not recommend. Right? So it would be more of body awareness, active exercises, pranayama, maybe some chanting or something which to reduce, because people with schizophrenia also have anxiety, but then long meditative practices would not be a good idea for people with psychosis, right? Similarly, for people with depression, right? Forward bending practices may not be very good. We focus more on opening up practices. We focus more on fast breathing for people with depression. On the other hand, for anxiety, people with anxiety, fast breathing may actually provoke more anxiety. So there we focus more on this slow breathing awareness, Brahmari, this kind of thing. So the practices in each of these would differ, and we have made a set of practices which, we don't want to patent it, so we have put it out on we have published that on that book, almost all our modules. So people who are already qualified in yoga, if they want to teach yoga to people with mental illnesses, can very well look at those modules and adapt them.
Wonderful. I think that's such an excellent resource for those trying to teach yoga.
Yes.
Because I think everyone should be aware of what is safe and what is not safe.
Absolutely. That's the first thing. In fact, I have in the forward to that, actually, I have written that yoga practitioners should consider themselves very seriously as healthcare practitioners. And the main rule for any healthcare practitioner is not to cause harm first.
Absolutely.
Isn't it? That's something that we all need to keep in mind, that whether we make the person better or not, we should not harm them.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now we have a problem of population aging,
Yes,
especially in countries like India. And we are going to be confronted with all the challenges of an aging population as time goes by, the next couple of decades.
yes.
Um, how can yoga and yogic practices help a population age gracefully, retain its capabilities? Because this is going to be so important. Because if you live up to 80 or 90, not
Absolutely.
20 as the previous generation did,
Yes.
you need to age gracefully.
So actually, this is where I think that the benefits of yoga are most apparent. Because we now have many treatment modules for many other things. You have an infection, even diabetes. We have many treatment modules for aging. I mean, we don't really have a set of medicines that will reverse aging, although there are people who are trying to discover it with all this new GLP-1 agonists and stuff like this. But what we have found is that we did a very interesting study in people living in old age homes in Bangalore. One of my PhD students did that study. What he simply did was went to some old age homes in Bangalore, Bannerghatta Road and places like that, and taught yoga for 6 months to one group of people, and another group of people were in the control arm who were taught yoga later. What very interestingly we found is that this is a very ideal population because they're eating the same food, living in the same place. Almost everything is same except that one group was taught yoga and one group was not. At the end of 6 months, we found sleep was better, anxiety was reduced, memory was significantly better in people who did the yoga. And in a follow-up study, we were able to actually show that the size of the hippocampus in these people was actually bigger. It got bigger after 6 months of yoga.
Wow.
Which is a remarkable finding because as medical professionals, we know that the size of our brain gradually reduces as we age. It happens to everybody. Particularly vulnerable is the area called the hippocampus, which is critical for memory. And this actually becomes smaller with age. And in people above the age of 60, 65, if you can show that we can reverse this, it's a remarkable thing. That's what keeps us young, memory, the ability to do, the ability to move is what keeps us young. In this context, I should say, last week we lost the father of one of our senior faculty at NIMHANS, Dr. Prabha Chandra. Her father passed away, he was 94, and he donated his body to science. And when we actually looked at the brain, there was almost no atrophy at 94. And he was a lifelong yoga practitioner. You look at people like B.K. Iyengar, look at this, he was a very sick child, as you would have heard. Iyengar was a very sick child. He turned to yoga to get himself fitter. Until the age of 94, he was doing yoga. He was perfectly rational, perfectly memory, so good. So there is no doubt at all, there is now enough of imaging research which shows that people who do long-term yoga and meditation lose less brain matter as they age. There is absolutely no doubt about it.
It's wonderful to know, and it's so nice that science is backing up
Yes.
the practice of yoga in order to preserve brain health. Now, we are all familiar with the pre-diabetic stage.
Yes.
And, impaired glucose tolerance is something that most people now are aware of. But we now have a pre-dementing stage, mild cognitive impairment, where people have some recent memory difficulties, but they are retaining their other abilities. They don't have impaired activities of daily life or anything like that, but they're starting to lose their memory.
Yes.
And this is when people become aware. They start consulting doctors like you and me, and we are helping them diagnose. Is there research to tell us that starting yoga and yogic practices at this stage of MCI can actually help you preserve your memory and improve your outcomes beyond what you've already spoken about?
Yes, yes. So we have devised, like I said, a specific yoga module for this kind of mild cognitive impairment, MCI. And what we have found is particularly some of the practices, some of the breathing practices, as well as a very simple practice, which you put your feet up, just your feet. It's a very easy thing to do. not the full reverse kind of thing, just to put your feet up against the wall, maybe do it for 5 minutes. It has shown that not only that the rate of deterioration in memory is preserved, sometimes you can actually get better, right? So especially in the stage where you have not yet really lost a lot of memory, in dementia it's very difficult to reverse anything, but in this stage it is definitely possible. The second thing which can help is very strong diet regulation. One of the reasons why so much problems are happening, I think, is simply because we eat too much. The practice has become that in fact, I think 2023 is in the world, it has been something that there are more people in the world who are eating too much rather than people who don't have enough to eat. The world has crossed that stage now. So cutting down carbohydrates is another thing which would actually help reduce deterioration of memory. So these are the two things which are very critical. One is some yoga practices, and then lifestyle regulation.
Right. In fact, some personal experience, for various reasons, for the last couple of days, I've had a smaller portion of lunch, and it didn't make a difference. I actually felt pretty good.
Yes.
And, so somehow we kind of think of certain things that we have to eat so much.
Many people tell me that, yeah, if I don't eat a heavy dinner, I may not be able to sleep. Actually, it's a very, very, I don't know, common fallacy maybe people think, but actually you are giving your brain work when it should be resting.
Right.
The whole idea of this intermittent fasting or whatever it is simply that the brain is given a break from coordinating digestion. It's very simple. It's not rocket science. You need to understand that your body cannot be constantly just doing digestion. If it does the repair in the brain, what we talk about neuroplasticity and all this stuff, is just that the brain tries to repair when you are resting. And if you are constantly eating, the brain is not able to give time to that. So that's all we are doing by reducing. And most people who do this actually realize that their energy actually increases and not decreases if they eat less.
Excellent. Great to know this. Now, one of the other things that older people struggle with are falls.
Yes.
And how can yoga help in fall prevention and maintaining better posture and balance?
So balancing postures are one of the very common things taught to people who are, let's say, above 50, 60 or 70, and very, very simple exercises. You can't really do things which so that is where the supervision comes in. That's what I'm talking about when people look at YouTube and Baba Ramdev or whoever it is and try to do what he is doing, and it may be very dangerous for you, So I would think that you should meet somebody who look at your balance, look at your posture, and then suggest what are the things that you should do, right? And it's very important to do things slowly. Fast yoga is very easy to do, but it's not going to give you a lot of benefit. You have to do things slowly. In fact, doing Surya Namaskara fast is very easy. Anybody can do. You do it slowly, hold each pose for a long time, very difficult. So doing the same thing slowly is what I would really recommend for people who have problems with balance, problems with posture. Maybe do only 2 postures, do it very, very slowly, take support. Iyengar brought up that first thing about props. He said, what is the problem? Why should you not use support if you want to do? So use props, use chair, use whatever you want. Make sure you are safe. Do things very slowly. It will definitely improve your posture and balance.
Excellent advice. One of the challenges that we have been encountering are long COVID symptoms that have followed COVID. And a key aspect of long COVID symptoms are clinical autonomic dysfunction. People feel dizzy, they feel, they're hard to stand up, they have gut health issues, breathing issues, palpitations, a whole range of symptoms which are concerned with the autonomic nervous system. Now, yoga, of course, has a huge potential to help with autonomic stability. Can you please explain that to us? And I'm going to ask you a related question.
Right.
What is the Kundalini when we think about yoga and autonomic stability?
So, in fact, the autonomic hypothesis, what we call of yoga, is one of the central things that we think that what leads to the improvement in many neurological and psychiatric conditions. Parkinson's, for example, yoga has shown a lot of benefit, right? And almost all these disorders, there is an effect on the autonomic system. Even diabetes, all chronic disorders affect the autonomic system. And what is the most common disturbance in autonomic system is that the sympathetic part of the system is in overdrive, right? And the parasympathetic system is very much suppressed. And yoga seems to reverse this and bring up the balance, right? So parasympathetic is the calming system, and the sympathetic is the fight-flight response, which most of us are in most of the time. And if you do the yoga practices, like I said, slowly and mindfully, definitely parasympathetic activation happens, and that would balance the system. And long COVID is one of the examples of a hyper autonomic system. Everything is tuned to something, which is going to be catastrophic, right? That is what typical it is. We had a recent, Dr. Venkat, one of my colleagues, was referred to a lady after COVID who is simply unable to come out of her room. Any sound, any, disturbance just sends her crazy. So we actually did some online sessions for her with yoga, and we are actually seeing benefit. She can't even tolerate the sound of a spoon falling down. Her acoustic system has become so, hyper reflexive that she goes into, some kind of a catatonic state if that happens. So slowing down things, bringing them under control helps control many of these things. Particularly, again, I'm talking about the slow pranayama, the Brahmari, the slow Anulom Vilom. The slow breathing practices would definitely help people with long COVID-induced syndromes.
Right. That's great to know. And very quickly, a word on the Kundalini, because this is something that, it's part of our scriptures, it's part of yoga lore.
So the simplest way to look at Kundalini is that it is a source of energy, right? They look, of course, the chakras they talk about, and it is located and all that. And it is an energy which is, you have to learn to control, right? So if you ask a yoga person, they will say Kundalini yoga is for people who have mastered a certain level of yoga. They will be able to control that energy when they are able to access it. If you are not at that level, they would not advise you to do anything which is Kundalini awakening or Kundalini yoga. In fact, they say this is one of the reasons when people have psychosis, when they try to suddenly meditate without practice, this is what happens, right? So the simplest way to look at it is a source of immense energy which is inside us. If it's well controlled, it could lead to a great lot of benefits, but if it is not well controlled, it could take you the other way.
Good to know that. Looking ahead 5 or 10 years, what's your vision for the role of brain, mind, and yoga in global healthcare, the larger sense?
So I think that just like we have a multidisciplinary team in psychiatry now, we have a psychologist with us, we have a social worker with us, sometimes an occupational therapist, sometimes a physical rehabilitation person. Just like that, I envision that yoga therapists would become part of the multidisciplinary health setup in most areas in medicine. It's already happened in US and other places, particularly, for example, take the example of low back pain. The American Orthopedic Association says yoga is grade 1 evidence for low back pain, and there are very, very few things with grade 1 evidence for low back pain, almost nothing actually speaking. So I envision that yoga therapies would become an integral part of healthcare as another, there is a allopathic or a medical or whatever doctor leading the team, of course, but still we have other people in the team and they are equally important. So I think that yoga therapy, but for that, the yoga therapists, like I said, have to think of themselves as healthcare practitioners. They have to be in tune with this health philosophy that we are trying to improve the health of this person. Yes, you can talk about spirituality, you can do all that, but in today's world, you have to be careful that you select the right person and apply the right tools for that person. But I think it will happen.
Is NIMHANS offering a course at this point in time?
Oh yes, we run a lot of, the integrative medicine department runs a lot of online and offline courses as well. One of the courses, for example, is the certificate course in integrative medicine, which is actually happening now. We run it every year from June to December. It's a 6-month, almost completely online course. Maybe one contact class we will have, but otherwise it's online. This is for mainly all medical professionals. MBBS, BAMS, BNYS, whatever medical professional you are, you can apply for that course, and it is a course about integrative medicine. We also run a course for yoga therapists to teach them about mental health and yoga. We run a course for psychologists and social workers to teach them about yoga that they can recommend to their patients. So we run a lot of courses. So you can visit the NIMHANS website and look at the Department of Integrative Medicine. You will get details of all the courses.
As we come to the end of the conversation, is there one key takeaway that you'd like to share with our audience?
I think the simplest thing I would say is that you can improve your brain at any point of time. Science has taught us now that what we talk about neuroplasticity, it really does not, because when we were medical students, we are taught that brain is very static organ. Something happens, you can't change it, unlike the skin and other things. But we now know that's not true. The brain can change at any point of time, even if you're 70 years old, and it's never too late to start practices which can improve your brain. That one of them is yoga.
Excellent. Very good to know. Thank you for being with us at the Neurocrish Immersion. Thank you for sharing so much knowledge so freely with all of us. And I'm sure that many of us will now visit the NIMHANS Integrative Department website to understand more about this very valuable research and work that you're doing and the outcomes that are of benefit to society.
Thank you very much, Krish. Thank you.
Great having you on board. Thank you. So thanks so much. Lovely having a chat. And once we've posted it, we will share it with you.
Sure.
It will be on both LinkedIn and Twitter.
Okay.
So we'll share with you, and then you can share it with your friends and family.
Thanks a lot. It is actually a nice conversation. Thank you.
Enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you
so much.